Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Jaswinder Kumar, Assistant Professor, University Institute of Hotel and Tourism Management, Punjab University, Chandigarh. Today, we will discuss about United Nations Conference on Environment and Development UNCED and its agenda. The main objectives are to know the brief history of United Nations Conference on Environment and Development UNCED and to understand the agendas of United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. On 22nd December 1989, the United Nations General Assembly called for a global meeting that would devise strategies to halt and reverse the effects of environmental degradation in the context of increased national and international efforts to promote sustainable and environmentally sound developments in all countries. Agenda 21 adopted by United Nations Conference on Environment and Development on 14th June 1992 is the international community's response to that request. It is a comprehensive program of action to be implemented from now and into the 21st century by the governments and development agencies, United Nations organizations, and independent sector groups in every area where human activity affects the environment. The program should be studied in conjunction with the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development and the Principles for the Sustainable Management of Forests. These were also adopted at the conference known as the Earth Summit, which was held from 3rd to 14th June 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Agenda 21 is the notion that humanity has reached a defining moment in its history. Agenda 21 on Sustainable Development is an international blueprint that outlines actions that governments, international organizations, industries, and the community can take to achieve sustainability. These actions recognize the impacts of human behaviors on the environment and on the sustainability of systems of production. The objective of Agenda 21 is the elevation of poverty, hunger, sickness, and illiteracy worldwide while halting the deterioration of ecosystems which sustain life. It was adopted at the UNCED Summit meeting on 14 June 1992 and covers all the issues referred to UNCED by United Nations General Assembly. Agenda 21 of UNCED is divided into 4 sections: social and economic dimensions, examining the human factors and problems of development along with the key issues of trade and integrated decision making. Conservation and management of resources for development, the largest section of Agenda 21 presenting the range of resources, ecosystems and other issues, all of which must be examined in detail if sustainable development is to be achieved at global, national and local levels. After that, strengthening the role of major groups, it looks at the social partnerships necessary if sustainable development is to be a reality. It recognizes that government and international agencies cannot alone achieve sustainable development and that the community, through representative and industry organizations, must be a key player in the development of policy and in achieving the necessary changes. And the means of implementation, that is, it examines the question how to do we get there, and it looks at the resources which must be mobilized in support of sustainable futures. While finance and technology are key elements, it also deals with aspects of education, institutional and legal structures, data and information, and the building of national capacity in relevant disciplines. Essential to a proper understanding of Agenda 21 is an appreciation of several major themes and ideas which run through the Agenda 21 document, and it includes the key role that must be played by strategies, plans, and policies at national level, the need for integrated decision making at all levels, and the importance of community involvement in the implementation of Agenda 21. The United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development is responsible for monitoring implementation of United Nations Conference on Environment and Development decisions. In first meeting in 1993, the first meeting of Conference on Sustainable Development was held in 1993, and it was an organizational meeting, while the second, third and fourth sessions in 1994, 1995 and 1996 were substantial reviews of groups of Agenda 21 chapters. The first review was completed in 1996 and the last held in 1997. The fifth session of Conference on Sustainable Development in 1997 was devoted to preparing for a special session of the United Nations General Assembly for an overall review of the implementation of Agenda 21. It was held in June 1997 and marked the fifth anniversary of Rio Summit and considered progress on sustainable development and identified key priority areas for further attention by international community. United Nations session did not redraft Agenda 21, but it identified the key factors and the institutions or agreements dealing with those issues were considered. There were some work plan for the Commission on Sustainable Development which nominates a sectoral theme, a cross-sectoral theme and an economic sector or major group to be considered each year. For example, in December 2000, the United Nations General Assembly resolved to review progress in achieving sustainability since the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development at summit level meeting, the World Summit on Sustainable Development. It was hosted by Government of South Africa and held at Johannesburg from 26th August to 4th September 2002. The main focus of this was the future direction of the Global Sustainable Development Agenda and pursuing effective means for the implementation. International cooperation to accelerate sustainable development in developing countries. For this, Agenda 21 proposals aim to liberalize trade, make trade and environment mutually supportive, provide adequate financial resources, deal with international debt, and encourage macroeconomic policies conducive to environment and development. Removing distortions in international trade is essential, in particular substantial and progressive reduction in support and protection of agriculture, covering internal regimes, market access and export subsidies. In this and other sectors including industry, protectionism, should be stopped and tariff and non-tariff barriers should be removed. Agenda 21 also focused that developing countries should diversify their economies in order to reduce dependence on commodity exports. Agenda 21 also dealt with environment and trade policies, and it described that it should be mutually supportive. For combating poverty, Agenda 21 proposals cover population policies, healthcare and education, the rights of women, and the role of young people, indigenous people, and the local communities in order to enable all people to achieve sustainable livelihoods. It said that policies need to be simultaneously address development, sustainable resource management, and poverty eradication. Agenda 21 also focused that government should, among other things, support a community-driven approach to sustainability by empowering local and community groups, generate employment by giving high priority to basic education and professional training, and set up an effective primary and maternal health care system accessible to all. It focused that women should have full participation in decision making. Women and men should have the same right to decide freely and responsibly on the number and spacing of their children. Health facilities should include women-centered, women-managed reproductive health care services, including prenatal care, should be there. Agenda 21 also talked about changing consumption patterns. It said that poverty and environmental degradation are closely interrelated. While poverty results in environmental stress, the major cause of global environmental deterioration is an unsustainable pattern of consumption and production, particularly in the industrialized countries, which aggravates poverty and imbalances. For achieving sustainable development, it will require efficiency in production and changes in consumption in order to optimize resource use and minimize the creation of waste. And this will require reorientation patterns of development in industrial societies which have been copied in much of the developing world. Proposals in Agenda 21 call for greater attention to issue around consumption and for new national policies to encourage the shift to sustainable consumption patterns. Agenda 21 also addresses certain related issues such as energy, transportation, waste, economic instruments, and the transfer of environmentally sound technology. All countries led by developing countries and developed countries led by developed countries should strive to promote sustainable consumption patterns. With regard to demographic dynamics and sustainability, Agenda 21 of UNCAD proposes that population factors be thoroughly researched. A better understanding is needed of the relationships among demographic dynamics, technology, cultural behavior, natural resources, and life support systems. International education on the urgency of population issues should be improved. Population concerns should be more fully integrated into national planning, policy, and decision making. Policies should combine environmental concerns and population issues in a holistic view of development. The primary goals should include alleviation of poverty, secure livelihoods, good health, quality of life, improvement of the status and income of women, their access to schooling and professional training, and fulfillment of their personal aspirations and empowerment of individuals and communities. With regard to protecting and promoting human health, Agenda 21 focuses on meeting primary healthcare needs, controlling communicable disease, coping with urban health problems, reducing health risks from environmental pollution, and protecting vulnerable groups such as infants, women, indigenous peoples, and the poor people. Education, housing, and public works should be the part of an overall strategy for achieving health for all. Government should build basic health infrastructures, paying particular attention to the provision of safe water and food supplies, sanitation services, proper nutrition, health education, immunization, and essential drugs. The transfer of healthcare technology, training of personnel, and capacity building are also needed. Environmental control measures are indispensable, especially in the area of water supply and sanitation, in order to curb many communicable diseases, including cholera, malaria, and diarrheal diseases. The next agenda of UNCAD talks about promoting sustainable human settlements. Agenda 21 proposes for improvement of social, economic, and environmental quality of human settlements and the living and working environments of all people, in particular the urban and rural poor. Focus on planning and the management methods in several programs area should be such as at least 1 billion people do not have access to the safe and healthy shelter. The global strategy for the shelter should support politically and financially so that billions of people can have the safe shelter. Agenda 21 also talks that urban areas generate 60% of the gross national product and can develop the capacity to sustain the productivity. Countries should, among other things, accelerate efforts to reduce urban poverty, improve infrastructure, and train a cadre of managers, technicians, and administrators. To counter mass migration to crowded cities, rural development opportunities, and international cities should be developed. With regard to policy making for sustainable development, Agenda 21 talks about that decision making in many countries tends to separate economic, social, and environmental factors. Countries can no longer afford to make decisions without considering environment and development issues. A fundamental reshaping of the planning process may be necessary and should be implemented. It proposes the full integration of environmental and development issues for government decision making on economic, social, fiscal, energy, agricultural, transportation, trade, and other policies. Agenda 21 also talks about protecting the atmosphere and making the energy transition. And in that regard, it focuses on the 4 program areas. Number 1, uncertainties in relation to scientific knowledge. Number 2, sustainable development in regard to energy, transport industry, and land and marine resources, stratospheric ozone depletion, and number 4, transboundary air pollution. And there are proposals which government should deal, such as the provisions of 1985 Vienna Convention for the protection of ozone layer and 1987 Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. It also talks about the various United Nations frameworks and conventions on climate change to be implemented for environmental protection. It also talks about integrated approach to land resource use, and in that regard it says that increasing human demand for land, a finite resource, and for the natural resource it's supporting is creating competition and conflict that results in land degradation. Resolving such conflict requires an integrated approach to land use that examines all needs so that the most efficient trade-offs can be made. Agenda 21 proposals for sustainable land resource management and use focus on decision making. Integration means that environmental, social, and economic issues should be considered simultaneously. With regard to combating deforestation, Agenda 21 calls on countries to strengthen their forest related institutions and improve their technical and professional skills through various measures such as promoting the participation of labor unions, rural cooperatives, local communities, indigenous people, youth, women, the private sectors, users groups, and non-governmental organizations in forest-related activities. Conducting research in forests, including gathering data on forest cover, areas suitable for afforestation and ecological values. Supporting and enhancing technology transfer and specialized training can also benefit the various countries. With regard to halting the spread of desert, Agenda 21 states that the priority in combating desertification should be preventive measures for lands that are yet not degraded or which are only slightly degraded. There are certain severely degraded areas that shouldn't be neglected. The desertification and drought should be properly monitored and need to identify the priority areas of action in these areas. Government should establish and strengthen national systems which should also measure the economic and social consequences of desertification. Next agenda is protecting mountain ecosystems. Agenda 21 proposals focuses on improving knowledge about ecology and sustainable development of mountain ecosystems and on promoting watershed development and alternative employment for people whose livelihoods are linked to practices that degrade the mountains. The next agenda is with regard to sustaining biological diversity, and Agenda 21 proposes for conserving biodiversity, call on governments to press for the early entry into force of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, foster traditional methods and knowledge of indigenous people and their communities, share the benefits of biological resources, including biotechnology, in particular with developing countries, and develop national strategies for the conservation of biodiversity. For sustainable use of biological resources and the safe transfer of biotechnology, particularly to developing countries, should be emphasized. After that, it also talks about environmentally sound management of biotechnology. Agenda 21 focuses on various areas such as food, in which biotechnology can increase the nutritional value of crops, livestock and fish, and the shelf life of food and animal feed products. It can improve agricultural output through integrated pest, disease and crop management techniques that eliminate dependence on agrochemicals. With regard to health, biotechnology can help combat communicable diseases through new and improved vaccines, drugs, medicines, and diagnostics, and can detect pollutants and pathogens in drinking water. With regard to environmental protection, biotechnology can help to rehabilitate degraded ecosystems and landscapes through reforestation and afforestation, cultivation of new plants and the varieties of different plants, soil conservation, reduce the risk of hazardous waste through biological treatments, decrease waste volume through the use of biodegradable materials, and remove pollutants from the environment such as accidental oil spills. And the sound management of biotechnology also preserves biological diversity. Next agenda is safeguarding the ocean's resources, and in that regard, Agenda 21 focuses on threats posed by sedimentation, pollution, harmful fishing practices, and climate change. Many program areas share common problems such as lack of data, lack of planning, lack of management, lack of international coordination and technology transfer, and inadequate funds. With regard to action for women for sustainable and equitable development, Agenda 21 proposes that governments embrace a number of objectives related to women's advancement and education, while Agenda 21 proposes that all countries should implement the forward-looking strategies for women which emphasize the need for women to participate in ecosystem management and control of environmental degradations. It says that policies are needed to increase the proportion of women in programs for sustainable development involving decision making, planning, and technical and management roles. With regard to science for sustainable development, it focuses that there should be more research into climate change, resource consumption rates, demographic trends, and environmental degradation, and the methods for long-term assessment of natural resources should be improved. The research capacity in developing countries should be strengthened. The strategies for sustainable development must be based on an accurate assessment of the Earth's carrying capacity and resilience to human activity. A deeper understanding of the interconnection between water, nutrient, and biogenic cycles and the energy flows of land, oceans, and atmosphere is crucial. And the Agenda 21 says that the efficiency of resource utilization should be improved and alternatives should be developed, such as less intensive use of energy in industry, agriculture, and transportation. Next agenda is with regard to promoting environmental awareness. With regard to strengthening of institutions for sustainable development, Agenda 21 says that there is need for existing institutions should be modified and strengthened, and new institutions should be created that work for sustainable development. There should be national capacity building for environment and development. There should be efforts from all the governments. There should be the role of institutions within the United Nations, and for this, the post conference arrangements and the relationship between the United Nations system and other international, regional, national, and non-governmental institutions or organizations, including industry, business, and scientific community, should work together for sustainable development. With regard to bridging the data gap in sustainable development, Agenda 21 says there is need for information that arises all levels, from that national and international decision makers can take the advantage of that data. The gap in the availability, the standards and accessibility of data between developed and developing world has been increasing, and this has seriously impaired the capacities of countries to make informed decisions concerning environment and development. There is also need for better collection and assessment of data for improved coordination among environmental, social, demographic and developmental data and information activities. Commonly used indicators such as gross national product and measurements of individual resource or pollution flows do not provide adequate indications of sustainability. There is need for bridging this data gap, such as creating indicators for sustainable development to provide solid basis for decision making at different levels. These should be used in satellite accounts and eventually in national accounts. Improving data collection and analysis, and for this, countries and organizations should carry out inventories of environmental, resource and developmental data. They should make use of new techniques for data collection, such as satellite based remote sensing. Dear learners, till now we discussed that how United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which is also called as Agenda 21, have given different guidelines and agendas with regard to sustainability, with regard to conservation and with regard to the overall development of societies, environment and economy. If these guidelines are properly implemented with all governments globally, definitely the Agenda 21 is going to achieve its objectives and it is going to contribute for the sustainable development of Earth and sustainable development of mankind. Thank you very much.